Welcome back to the virtual Computational Genomics Conference. I am your co-host, Cami Singera. Before break, we heard about various research use cases on different platforms. In this session, we will learn about various funding mechanisms. I would like to invite my colleague, Dr. Iosif Waisman, to moderate our session on funding agencies. Dr. Waisman is Professor of Bioinformatics and Computational Biology and Director of the School of Systems Biology at George Mason University. Some of the current research projects of Dr. Waisman involve various areas of computational biology and bioinformatics with a specific focus on understanding correlations between protein sequence, structure, and function using machine learning models. Dr. Waisman?
Thank you, Cami, and thank you to all the organizers for having this panel. We have three esteemed guests today. Dr. Ken Wiley, who is a program director at the National Human Genome Research Institute. He is with the Division of Genomic Medicine there. Dr. Stephanie Rogers, she is acting principal director of biotechnology and director of biotechnology initiatives for the Department of Defense. And Joe Buccina, who is director of intelligence, community support, and B.Next operations for an In-Q-Tel, a company that makes strategic investments in the science-intensive ventures on behalf of the US government. So with our panelists, we will have three very interesting finding in science in general, in computational biology and computational genomics in particular. Before starting our conversation, let me just very briefly share some numbers that will help us to understand the overall landscape of funding for research and development in the United States and around the world. And actually, before doing this, several people today already quoted Francis Collins, and I couldn't resist from bringing this quotation where he says that today, if you're involved in biomedical research and you don't have familiarity with computational biology, you are going to fall behind. And anybody who wants to work in biology and medicine needs to have a big data kind of attitude. So it is. It was said 8 years ago, but remains very, very appropriate today as well. So with regard to the promised numbers, if you look at the overall funding for research in the United States, we can see that it has been growing steadily in the last 10 years. Here we have contributions from industry and higher education, and I'm sorry. So those are not contributions; those are performing sectors, and we can see that well, higher education and federal government they're a little bit dwarfed by the industry, but they've been growing. So higher education research grew by 35% in 10 years. Federal government research grew by 20% in 10 years. If we look at the sources, again, the largest contribution comes from the industry, and the second largest funder is federal government. So in terms of absolute dollars, the amounts were increasing. However, if we look at research funding as a share of gross domestic product, we can see that it has been actually fairly stagnant for the past 65 years. So this is starting from 53. Well, it did increase originally. There was a peak in the early 1960s during the space race with the Soviet Union, but then it fell down and finally kind of lingered at about 2.5%. Only 2 years ago, it crossed psychologically important 3% boundary. So this is again, the top line is total funding. If you look at the federal funding, it was decreasing, steadily decreasing in the last 60 or so years. How United States are doing compared to other countries is shown here. And you can see that except two outliers, Israel and Korea, which spent close to 5% of their GDP on research and development. United States, by crossing this 3% barrier, joined a handful of other scientific powerhouses like Germany, Austria, Japan, Sweden, Taiwan. All of those spend a little bit more than 3% of their GDP on science. And then you can see that other also very important scientifically and research-wise countries like United Kingdom and France and Canada spend actually less than 3%, some significantly less than 3% on science. By zooming into distribution by the type of research, we can see that in the federal funding, biomedical research currently is on top and by far the larger share of funding than the rest of the fields. And actually in this plot, we have two curves for biomedical research. One, the green one, the largest one, coming from NIH funding, but then there is another, the pink line, that corresponds to life science funding at other agencies like Department of Defense and DOE and NSF and so forth. So together, those two, NIH and life science funding from other agencies, are compared to the rest of the discipline combined. So we do have a very large investment in our area of research. Looking inside the NIH, and this is just a selected number of institutes, we can see that two largest ones are National Cancer Institute and National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases, and both of those are heavily involved in genomic research. Cancer Institute, of course, is mostly interested in human genomics. NIAID is doing both human genomes and also pathogens genomics. And then the other institutes, including Human Genome Research Institute, which we have represented on the panel, have smaller but significant amount of funding. If you look at other agencies like NSF, the Bio Directorate of NSF, the bottom part of those bar graphs, as you can see, it was completely flat in the past 15 years or so. So there is no increase in NSF funding for biological research. The amount that they have, it's about $500 million a year, is not insignificant, but it is much, much smaller than what is provided by NIH and actually some other agencies. Looking into the market and predictions for the future of the markets in computational biology and bioinformatics, we can see that the growth is predicted to remain extremely healthy at 21 or almost 22% annual growth rate. And it is predicted to reach 15 billion in 2027. This is for computational biology. Market analysts separate computational biology from bioinformatics. The bioinformatics market overall is a little bit, currently it's larger, but computational biology market is predicted to bypass it in the size. And you can see that growth rate for bioinformatics market is a little bit smaller, but still very, very decent, 13.5% of adjusted annual rate. If we look into the distribution of this bioinformatics market forecast by components, we will see that genomics actually is the main part of bioinformatics market. They have separate sections for genomics, which is mostly human genomic. Then there is separate microbial genomics, gene engineering, proteomics, and the dots here represent 2017, which is 4 years ago, and orange dots are 2026. And you can see that the amounts will more than triple in just 10 years. So all of this is just to underline that we are in an extremely dynamic environment. The importance of those areas was already highlighted today by Andrea Norris, by other speakers. And now we will invite our panelists to shed some light on what their organizations are doing and how they are approaching this research environment and this research landscape. I will start with asking our panelists some questions, and then in the end we will have time for questions from the audience. So if you do have questions, please type them. And so after we complete this first part of the discussion, we will switch to your questions. So my first question to the panel is, I would like to ask panelists to describe their organization activities, strategic planning, investment for computational genomics, and other related areas. What is the current state and how it is going to change in the next several years? And I think we'll probably do some random order. So just in a way, like I see the panelists on the screen. Joe, would you be interested in starting this conversation?
Sure, I'm glad to start. Thanks for getting things kicked off. And just for all you guys watching, you know, I think Zoom backgrounds were made for people with hair. So hopefully the distortion up here isn't too bad. But my name is Joe Buccina. I will answer all of Iosif's questions, but I want to start with a little background on In-Q-Tel, very brief, because I think it will set the stage. So we're a strategic investor for the national security community. That's most of the intelligence community, some parts of DoD and other agencies as well. You know, some of the slides that you showed for the intro are some of the same sort of slides that we show to talk about why the Intel community back in 1999 started In-Q-Tel. You know, primarily that there's so much great R&D and innovation going on in the private sector, and the government had to find a way to tap into that. So what we do for our customers involves primarily providing situational awareness and detect trends, also providing a mechanism into tech transfer. And we go across, you know, probably a dozen or so major tech sectors, biotech, and, you know, within that, genomics, computational genomics is certainly one of our focus areas. Within In-Q-Tel, I'm part of our B.Next lab. I put lab in quotes there. It's really more of like a hybrid investment arm and think tank. We're focused on the intersection of biotech and national security. But, you know, we don't do a lot of research on our own. We don't really fund research. We fund startups. That's half of what we do, that are, of course, ultimately based on great research that's going on in areas like computational genomics. But we also do things like thought pieces, events. So a couple of years back, and Stephanie will remember this because she was back in In-Q-Tel at this point, we did an event on AI applications to biotech. So certainly a lot of what we do involves computational genomics. Generally, our focus is more on the application, how it applies to national security. So within that vein, when we started in 2015, our primary focus was biotech for combating epidemics. And I think, you know, the tragedy that's been, you know, COVID for the past year and 3 months or so has really been, in a sense, validating of that thesis to focus there. But, you know, you asked kind of what's changing, what does the future hold? We've widened the aperture more recently, I think in part because COVID has gotten the message across to people that tech for combating epidemics is important. So in broad terms, and I'll probably get into specifics later, we're interested in anything that's important for biotech and national security. And I certainly see computational genomics as a very important part of that. With that, I'll stop and hand it off to the next person.
Thank you, Joe. Stephanie, would you like to provide your perspective?
Sure, absolutely. So similarly to Joe, I wanted to spend a little bit of time kind of going through kind of what biotech modernization is for the Department of Defense, since that's the department that I represent within the department. And then I'll kind of talk about where we focus in computational biology. So first and foremost, thank you for inviting me to be a part of this event. I'm really thrilled to have the opportunity to talk about this specific to the Department of Defense. In support of the National Defense Strategy, the DoD has 11 modernization priorities, and biotechnology is one of the newest ones. Inclusion of biotechnology in these priority areas is really an indication that the department recognizes how critically important biotechnology is to the future of the Department of Defense. Each modernization area is led by a principal director, and we are responsible for defining the strategy and the roadmaps to advance the priority area and unify the department's investments and capabilities in that area. So when we talk about biotechnology for the Department of Defense, what do we mean? So to us, biotechnology is an engineering discipline that utilizes or exploits living systems to produce a wide range of technologies and products. This includes the utilization of biological data to enable rapid technological advances. So we're all very familiar with using biology to make things. You can think of fermented foods, where these tiny cell factories are converting starting materials into foods like beer, wine, and yogurt. Using biotechnology, we can now make these cell factories that produce an enormous range of products, from foods and medicines to textiles and fuels. Biotechnology really combines engineering with advanced computation, automation, and biology to create biomanufacturing methods that are faster, cheaper, and better than conventional manufacturing. And this has huge commercial relevancy as well. It's not just important to the Department of Defense, but for our whole nation and the bioeconomy. A recent report from McKinsey concluded that as much as 60% of physical inputs to the global economy could be produced using biology. So why does DoD care about this in particular? The same core competencies that we just talked about can unlock products and capabilities with the potential to transform our military systems and fundamentally change how warfighting is done. This could include on-demand production of fuels, lubricants, and food, to novel sensors for monitoring the environment and chem biodefense threat landscape. There's a number of examples of applications of these, but just to highlight a few, our chem biodefense program has a wide range of capabilities against bio threats. COVID-19 has really pushed this forward even further, and we've been able to leverage existing relationships with academia and industry to further develop some of these therapeutics, including the first therapeutic candidate vaccine. Military medicine is an important aspect of this, where we can produce many things like replacement tissues for warfighters when they're injured in combat. Warfighter performance, as an example, where we have sensors that can detect when MREs, which is the food that they eat, are contaminated with foodborne pathogens. And that same technology can be used to decontaminate MRE packaging in a chem biodefense or a chem biocontaminated environment. And the materials and systems is a major area of our focus. And that's an example is the Air Force and DARPA partnering to develop biotechnology approaches to grow concrete in just a matter of days. And this can change the way that we think about building runways where we need them. So biotechnology really holds a promise to unlock rapid and innovative and diverse applications beyond what we can currently imagine. And there's really so much potential that we have just started to tap into. And leveraging advances in computational genomics and artificial intelligence and machine learning can really open that aperture even further and make potential even greater. And so we're very excited about the potential here and where we can go when we think about computational genomics. And so that brings us to really modernizing in biotech, which aims to accelerate the transition of the biotech science and technology, like those that we've just heard about, towards prototyping and production at a rate faster than is currently possible. A department that's modernized in biotechnology drives innovation and rapid translation of new knowledge to application for defense needs. And I think that application of new knowledge is really a key area where computational genomics and advanced analytics can really drive the capabilities so much further than we even realize. There's 3 pillars that really underscore the foundation of modernization. One is capacity. This includes like your physical capacity and infrastructure to actually advance technologies, the data, which is a major piece of modernization, and then the workforce to actually utilize and develop those tools. DoD has an enormous collection of biotechnology relevant data that can be leveraged to really advance these capabilities that are being developed in academic and industry and really drive them towards defense applications. So, and a recent example of this, really leveraging data as a common resource is the digital biobank that's within our Department of Defense. This is a precision medicine research technology platform that allows researchers and clinicians to upload and store omics data for further research. It can automate bioinformatic workflows, efficiently query large disparate data sets, integrate omics, clinical exposure, and military specific data, enable precision medicine analytics on large volumes of disparate data, and visualize data and analysis results. So this system has been under development for a number of years, and we're now moving into production, which is super exciting. And so I think when we talk about the future and how things are going to change over the next few years, specifically for the Department of Defense, not only do we recognize now that biotechnology and everything related to biotechnology is a priority, but now we have a platform that can help utilize data in a much more effective way and bring in other partners into that. Future developments of this particular platform include integration with electronic health records, and also expanding the user base beyond just Department of Defense to be able to bring in academic and industry partners to work alongside us in that data. And of particular interest for that digital biobank is privacy preserving data mining techniques. So I will highlight that as an area of interest for the future. Like I mentioned, COVID-19 has put huge focus on public health, military medicine, and resilience of our nation. There's a number of research efforts that have gone on in the Department of Defense. One which was only possible because of the digital biobank was a study that was on the SARS-CoV-2 variants and the severity of symptoms. So whenever we think about computational genomics for defense, we're thinking through the lens of how is our warfighter affected? How can we leverage new knowledge to understand what they're going to be facing or how we can make them more resilient? So that's a great example of how we can utilize data to actually understand how they're affected by COVID-19 and see that before it becomes a huge issue. There's a number of other projects related to that, but I won't go into those details here. But the ultimate is that we are very committed to partnering with academia and industry and our international colleagues to really expand our capabilities and advance modernization. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Ken, now it's your turn.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share with you some of the things that National Human Genome Research Institute has been focusing on. This is an ideal time for NHGRI. We just recently published our strategic vision for improving human health at the forefront of genomics manuscript, which really details the strategic vision of NHGRI for the next 10 years. One of the aspects of this is really in our strategic vision is to really focus on sustaining and improving a robust foundation for genomics. And we kind of look at this as breaking this into a couple of categories. So the categories we really look at is genome structure and function, genomic data science, genomics and society, and training and genomics workforce development. For the genomic structure and function, we really see as far as the future for genomics, really having a focus on understanding how we can enable routine generation analysis for increasingly complex genomic data. This also includes understanding how to use evolutionary and comparative genomic data. The genomic data science side, which is one of the areas that I focus on, we really want to look at how we can develop new methods to build and sustainable data resources for genomic researchers. We also want to ensure that we're able to facilitate the storing, sharing, and computing of large genomic data sets. As you know, the access to large data sets is not something that's equitably useful, accessible to people. And so we really want to find ways to try to address that barrier so that we can bring more groups in to understand how to use and analyze large genomic data sets. We also want to focus on developing integrated knowledge bases and informatics methodologies to advance genomic medicine. We understand that in the case of genomic medicine, there really is a need to understand that synergy between the computational and the human interaction. Not to have the computer replace the human, but more to work synergistically in helping to improve clinical decision support. And so these are areas that we focus on the genomic data science side. But of course, none of this can be done if we don't understand the relationships and interrelationships between the genomics and society and the social and environmental factors that influence human health. And so we also need to prepare and help train the next generation, and the next generation, to understand how to use these large genomic data sets and their associated metadata. And so this is really in a high-level view of what the strategic vision that NHGRI has for the forefront of genomics. For specifically me in the areas of that I focus on, aside from the clinical informatics side, I also try to look at ways to how to make genomic data, large genomic data sets and related metadata accessible. And so one of the things that NHGRI has funded recently is the Analysis Visualization Informatics Lab Space, which is really NHGRI's cloud-based resource platform, which is really designed to actually provide a shared analysis computing environment that has access to controlled and public access to genomic data sets and related metadata. And also provides, because this is a cloud platform that's built in this case off of Google Cloud, there's costs associated with it. We want to understand how we use this resource for trying to address cost control so that we can have equitable use of this resource for the community. We're also focusing on trying to do user training with Anvil, because we understand that it's not a simple plug and play or a simple method for trying to transition from your local prem systems and analysis platforms to the cloud. But we understand that there's a need to try to make that transition. And so we do provide user training and outreach opportunities for that, for people to become more familiar with using the cloud. We also don't see the Anvil as a place for, as an in-silo system, our infrastructure. We participate in a federated genomic data commons style ecosystem, working with other institutes that have funded their own individual cloud platforms to see where we can make our resources interoperable. And so we also want the Anvil also incorporates scientific and technological advances so that we can to help facilitate the use of analysis of large genomic data sets and the related metadata. So we have resources such as Galaxy Bioconductor that are built into Anvil, along with WIley, the UCSC Genome Browser, RStudent Doc Store are also available on our platform. And so, but all of this environment is there to help reduce barriers for developing collaborations and make accessible large genomic data sets. But none of this really works if we don't provide resources for people to understand how to use these resources. And so NHGRI has several funding opportunities that we've looked at that we have available for participants to apply to help understand how to use resources like the Anvil or other types of analysis, computational analysis resources to advance genomic research and integrate genomics into healthcare. One of those is a PAR 21025, which is really an R25 mechanism for research experience in genomic research for data scientists. This one's actually designed for currently enrolled master's degree students who have expertise in data science, but would like to understand more about how to use genomic data sets. And so this opportunity supports the entry of a master's degree students in data science, research experience. As long as you're in the master's program, that makes you eligible to submit an application for that. Doesn't guarantee you get funded, but it's one of the criteria. It does provide a budget up to $250,000 for a duration of 5 years. Our application due dates for this type of award are January 25th, May 25th, and September 25th. And so we also have a more short-term mentoring research career enhancement award, which is for a K-18, but this one is actually designed to promote diversity. So NHGRI understands that access and understanding how to use genomic data sets is not equitably distributed across the country. So we really do also focus on how to try to address that barrier. And so this opportunity provides support for scientists from diverse backgrounds, including underrepresented groups who wish to either expand their genomic competencies or change their research careers by acquiring new genomic research knowledge and skills. As an example, I'm one of those types of individuals. My background was computational chemistry and pharmacology. And I did my postdoc in Gelbart at Flybase, and that's really where I learned how to do genomics. And because of that experience, I've been locked into that path ever since. And so I look at these opportunities like this, this funding opportunity that I just described here as a really a chance to actually help broaden the diversity of representation of groups who are interested in trying to understand genomics. We also have another type of funding opportunity, which is really tailored towards mentored Quantitative Research Development Award. This is a K-25. And the purpose of this award is really to support investigators who, as I mentioned before, have more background in the engineering research science side, and would like to transition to understanding more how genomics can be used to address questions of health and disease. This funding opportunity provides protected time to perform supervised study and research, and it's for candidates holding degrees in quantitative sciences or engineering, it provides support for up to $100,000, including fringe and benefits per year, with research support for $40,000 per year. And the duration for this is for 5 years. And the application due dates for this year, as I mentioned, for the other ones are going to be May 25th and September 25th. For those who already have a resource or a computational resource that they would like, that they've developed and it's in the early stages, and they would like to get funding to further harden that system and to be able to expand on the work that they've done. We do have an investigator-initiated research in computational genomics and data science. This provides support at the R01, R21, and also our small business innovative research opportunities, which is the R43 and R44 mechanisms. This supports fundamental genomics research that also includes developing innovative analytical methodologies and approaches for early stage development of tools and softwares and refinement or hardening of softwares for those tools that are considered high value to the biomedical genomics community. The receipt date for this one though is November 21st. We consider these, for the R21 mechanism, that supplies up to $275,000 total costs. The R43 and R44, which is a small business innovation research grant, provides support not to exceed $275,000. And so, as you can see, with NHGRI, we really are trying to have a broad approach to try to introduce access to and understand how to use large genomic data sets and the related metadata, with the goal of trying to address, as I mentioned, the 4 components that we do see as needed to build a robust and strong foundation for genomics, which, as I mentioned before, is genomic structure and function, genomic data science, genomics society, and training and genomics development workforce. And so that's all I'd like to share.
Thank you very much, Ken. And although some panelists already touched on this a little bit, I'll still ask this next question, which may overlap with the previous one, and that is to provide a forward-looking view as to which areas of computational genomics are likely to be in focus of your organization in the near future. So what we can expect in the developments in the following years. Stephanie, would you like to start this one?
Sure, happy to. So in my remarks to the first one, I mentioned 4 areas of particular interest. military medicine, warfighter performance, materials and systems, and chem biodefense. So that's generally those 4 buckets is how we think about the areas of interest for biotech modernization for the department. Just to cue in on a couple examples or key areas where computational genomics can really facilitate. First of all, I'll say fully leveraging genomic information for those applications is key, and we're very interested in that. This includes not just human genomes, but microbial genomes too, and combining them with other omics data. So when we think about materials and systems, the microbial chassis design is an important aspect as an example. So how do we select the synthetic systems or chassis to have adequate expression of the target molecule? So having computational systems that can help to advance the design, generation, and testing of chassis designs and chassis systems would help to accelerate work going forward. Similarly, with biomanufacturing, using computational genomic tools and advanced analytic capabilities to predict which species or strains of a microorganism could produce a target molecule most effectively. You can think of that as which molecules are bioreachable, and then what organism is going to help us get there. So that's an example of areas of interest for kind of materials and systems. Another example for military medicine, I mentioned a couple of things about COVID-19 as an example, but thinking about model disease transmission and predicting novel targets for drugs, accelerating the realization of personal medicine through genomic analysis and predictive modeling of therapeutic treatments. But then also another example is doing high throughput screening of libraries of known compounds to identify potential countermeasures to new and novel threats. So those are just some examples. I will say beyond the specific kind of research projects that I just mentioned or research areas, it is also critical to not just think about the output of the research, but enabling the ability to advance enabling capabilities, like leveraging the research that's coming out of academia. How do we pull that into the ecosystem and translate that into actual operational use? And so one of the ways that we're focused on this is through building what we're calling a common foundation. And what that is a linked digital and physical infrastructure to accelerate the design, build, and test cycle within and among academic and industrial partners that we work with. By doing this, we're going to enable a rapid prototyping pipeline to move technical advances into the military relevant prototypes and demonstrations. And this will then allow us to move into the industrial base for scale-up manufacturing. So we're very interested in not just the research component, but actually the tools and the enabling technologies to actually bring the research through to the end use and to the operations. And then in addition to that, we're also interested in opportunities to foster the education and development of more workforce, specifically in computational biology for sure, and data science. That's a huge gap area that we'd love to be able to foster and bring more people on. So that is an area of real focus for our organization as well. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Stephanie. Ken, what is NHGRI sort of view into the future?
So for us, it's really, I have the unique ability to, privilege to be able to see from both the basic science side and the clinical side. And so I try to look at how these two areas can actually have either shared understandings or shared problems. And one of the things that I see really is, for both sides, whether it's on the clinical or the basic science side, is really understanding improvements in trying to incorporate and add an implementation component to the overall scientific framework. Both groups really need to have a focus on when it comes to the development, the use, and analysis of genomic data sets and the related metadata. genomics can't be done in a silo. I mean, so we really, both sides really need to have a focus on engaging, multi-level stakeholders in order to make sure you have a more balanced approach and broad support for whatever tools or analysis that you're being developed on the computational side using large genomic data sets. In some cases, especially on the clinical side, but I think in some ways on the basic science side, there needs to be ways to deal with to address how to maintain the security and privacy of the data sets and analysis while also without stifling innovation. I think in addition to that, you need to understand how we can develop our research methods, our analysis that can be done in a manner that mitigates inherent and pervasive biases, well, not mitigates, but prevents the inherent biases in data and information systems and knowledge, so that they can be broadly used to provide care and delivery to the broad, diverse community. We also need to understand that, access is important. The areas that also need to be focused on is how do we make these resources, make these data sets, make the outputs of these analysis that we're developing equitable to both high resource and low resource settings, to ensure that we're not exacerbating health disparities and other types of disparities. You also need to think about the interactions and the interfaces that we're developing, the workforce that we're developing. Are they scalable? Are they shareable? Can we have our computable inferences and of our genomic knowledge harmonized in a way that can have that broad, scalable, and shareable use? You also need to think about that on our education part. Are we creating the need to create education and policy components that reduce barriers to improve knowledge for patients, providers, and researchers? I mean, this is something that both groups actually have a need to focus on. And I mentioned this before, you really understand how we can improve the interfaces between the human cognition and the information technology to leverage the strength of both to improve both patient care and also analysis from the basic science side. And finally, things we should also consider is really, how do you develop methods to reuse genetic data? And that's useful for on the clinical side, because you want to see how you can reuse genetic data as patients are moving through the healthcare system and through life, but also on the basic science side. How can you reuse this data to make new discoveries? And so these are the areas that I see that we are going to have to focus, that we have to focus on now and continue to focus on in the future, to really ensure that the use of genomics is done equitably, that the outcomes and benefit that comes from such analysis are done in a manner that is broadly applicable, and really continues to build broad support for its use.
Thank you, Ken. Joe, so what is Iqt perspective on this?
Yeah, so we actually have a lot of overlapping interests from the ones that Stephanie highlighted. But again, I'll be speaking more from the perspective of what are we looking for out of startups, and less kind of what research projects do we think are important. So we're really focused right now on foundational technologies, and there's a list of those that I could share, but I'd like to focus on the ones that I think are relevant for computational genomics, and that is genomics. That's an easy one. Synthetic biology, and then also the intersection of bio and big data. And although only one of those has the word genomics in its name, I think computational genomics, and I've seen this in different companies, plays an important role in all three of those kind of three foundational technology areas. Really has to have some sort of application for national security. We define that very broadly. So it could be something as specific as a biodefense or public health vaccine or therapeutic for a particular infectious agent. I mean, that's very specific in a clear-cut case. On the other hand, it could be something as, we'll say high level, as something we think is important for the bioeconomy, which we think will be an increasingly important sector for US economic growth and hence for our national competitiveness. To make things a little more concrete, I can't share every biotech company we've invested in because some are not publicly announced, but I'll share two recent ones where computational genomics plays some sort of role in what they do. One is Ginkgo Bioworks. That's a very well-known synbio company, a very big one. And certainly the computational genomics is important to a lot of what they do. I think Stephanie highlighted some of the things, in terms of like microbial chassis that where there's an intersection between computational genomics and what a synbio company is doing. The other one's a little lesser known, but certainly a clear connection to the space, and that's Kylos Genetics. It's an Alabama-based company. They do personalized healthcare and sequencing. So I'll stop there, but if you're interested in learning about those companies, just give them a Google and you can see more.
Thank you, Joe. So, and before going to the next question, I just want to remind the audience that if you have questions for our panelists, please enter them into Q&A section. So we'll have them for the end of this session. So my next question is, what is your advice to researchers on the important steps before submitting the proposal in case of NIH, or before considering a startup in case of Iqt, or perhaps before providing some feedback on strategic planning in case of DoD Science Directorate? So Ken, would you like to start this one? Oh, Ken, you're still muted.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. Yeah, so I would say one of the most important steps before submitting the proposal is really talk to the program director. I know it sounds biased, but it really is a useful thing to do, because what you want to know is, before you've taken this effort to draft this proposal and submit it, is this something that would be of interest to the Institute? And that's where a program director can really help provide that level of guidance. I find that, interacting with my grantees, applicants who are just trying to understand just the complexities of the RFA, because there's a style that we have to follow when we're drafting these RFAs, and sometimes it helps to have a one-on-one discussion with your program director to understand if this really is going to fit within the strategic vision of the Institute. And even if it's not, they usually are very helpful in trying to help you find a home to submit an application to. So for me, I think that's the most important aspect of it to do before you've submitted your proposal.
Thank you, Ken. Joe?
Yeah, so my biggest piece of advice, and this is more for deciding whether you want to spin out a startup, is think about your product or service. Despite what you may see in TechCrunch or in the news, eventually, if you're doing a startup, you have to make some money. Maybe you're not profitable early on, but you got to bring in some revenue. So you could have the coolest, most groundbreaking computational genomics research, but if you haven't thought through what your product or service is, who your customers are, you will definitely have some challenges as a startup. Along those lines, especially if you were spinning out a company with fellow researchers, other scientifically or technically minded folks, bring in some sort of product person early. Ideally someone with experience, maybe someone with an MBA, doesn't have to, but just someone that can help you think through what we call a minimum viable product, think through how you're going to transform your great research into something that's commercially viable.
Thank you, Joey. Stephanie?
Yeah, so I would agree with pretty much everything that's been said so far from Joe and Ken. Getting to know the organization and the organizational needs is really important, whether that's connecting with someone like a program manager or someone within the organization. Like for us at DoD, really linking research and development to an operational use case is critical. I mean, we're not going to fund things that aren't going to drive towards advancing our operations. So making that connection early on, even at the very, very early stages of research, having an eye towards how is this going to be used? What are the limitations? What are the requirements? Like that's going to really help in the proposal process. And I'd also just encourage everyone to really explore your options, especially with DoD. I think we have many different ways to engage with the community. All the services, Army, Navy, Air Force have their own research labs and research programs. and they have grants programs through that they can work together and really leverage academic and industry. But then there's also DARPA, which is a huge piece of our 6162 research programs. An example is the Living Foundries program, which through that engaged tons of innovators across academia and industry to produce over 1,000 molecules that have DoD relevance that exceeded current standards. And that was all through bioengineering and a very computational genomic heavy in finding the right microbial genomes and expression systems to develop the end product. And so DARPA was really leading the way forward there. So that's a great way to engage for DoD, and they have an eye towards the end kind of operational use, which is helpful. We also have a small business innovation research office, the SBIR, and the DIU, Defense Innovation Unit, which can really help to bring innovation happening in the startup world and industry into the government more quickly. So there's a lot of opportunities. So don't get stuck in thinking one way and only one way, but explore all of your options and get to know the organization. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. So my next question is about the success stories. So what are some of the common traits for the grant proposals that got funded, for the startups that got funded, for the initiatives that went forward? Joe, would you like to take this one?
Yes, and no surprise here, I'll speak to the startups half of that question. So just following up on my last answer, commercial path and viability are really important. Not to be too pejorative, but In-Q-Tel doesn't really invest much in what you call beltway bandits. So if you are a company and your primary market is the US government, that's great. And I think there's an important role for that. But we are mostly looking at tech startups that have a commercial market as their primary focus. And we are just looking for them to either open up or bolster a line of what they do that's focused on government customers as well. So that's one. And two, I think for the biospace specifically, we're really focused because I mean we have limited funding and a limited number of kind of shots on goal each year for our investments. We're focused more on broader tech availability, applicability in platforms. So I'll give you a tangible example to explain what I mean. We saw a lot of pitches related to COVID-19 over the past year and a half. There was one company that I thought was pretty compelling. They were working on antivirals for COVID that might also be pan-coronavirus. But when I discussed with my team, we had a pretty quick no decision because it wasn't a novel platform. It was, was applicable to all coronaviruses, but it wasn't something that could produce kind of, your next generation of antivirals. So we took a pass on that one pretty quickly. On the other hand, we took a much closer look at a company that was developing a new vaccine platform because it was novel. There were a lot of great things about it. And so that was one that had, a candidate for COVID, but could also be used for a slew of different disease applications. So that's the sort of thing that caught our interest and that we took a closer look
at. Thank you, Joe. Stephanie?
Absolutely. So one common trait of successful proposals would be to have early data to show potential. Being able to demonstrate that there's something there is very, very helpful. Also, have a really good understanding of how to measure your progress and what you're able to achieve through a program by having well-defined metrics and being able to clearly articulate and define where key milestones are and be able to measure whether you hit them or not. That will help kind of de-risk the effort. So I can't stress that enough, that the metrics is really, really important. And then just engaging, like we talked about in the last question, just engaging with the funders and anybody that maybe has worked with the funding organization before, just to understand the mission space a little bit more. That can help frame the way that the proposal is set up and really tying it to that application area.
Thank you, Stephanie. Ken?
So I agree with everything that everyone has said so far. I would just add that, when we talk about grants, we hear the same. It's both a science and an art to getting funding in grant writing. And there's some truth to that. What I would say is that in the science part is really adhering to what the RFA is asking for. Being able to map what you're trying to do to specific items in that RFA, and that when you've done that part, you can assess and realize that you've hit all those key parts in the RFA in your application. The art part of this, though, is really how does that flow in that application? Everybody does this differently, but some of the ones that I see is where you're actually able to take the end product of one of the aims and use it as the beginning part of the next aim. So that when the reviewer is looking at it, they can see how all the pieces come together to put a mosaic together. And so having that art is going to be important. And for me, I look at it where, is this specific aim or objective actually a one-off, or is it something that's going to be critical to do the next objective or specific aim? So that's something you might want to think about. And of course, as I said before, talk to your program director. That's going to be the critical part. And that's all I have to add to that.
Thank you, Ken. And so my next question is about diversity and inclusion. In computational genomics, we face two significant challenges on this, and one is how we can diversify the pool of researchers by bringing people from underrepresented groups. But the second challenge is how we make sure that the pool of study subjects is diverse as well, particularly in those applications that are aimed at human genomics or human disease and all the related types of things. So my question is, what your organization is doing to promote diversity and inclusion? And I will start with Stephanie.
Absolutely. I think this is a really important topic, and I wanted to highlight some remarks that the Secretary of Defense Austin said on his first message to the force after confirmation. This is what he said. This is a quote. He said, "We maintain and enhance force readiness and develop the capabilities we need to protect America when we fully embrace the diversity of backgrounds, experiences, and thought. The department will lead with our values, building diversity, equity, and inclusion into all aspects of our work and in everything we do. Inclusivity will drive innovative solutions across the enterprise and create a constructive environment in which every person has the space to contribute fully." And what I know of this Department of Defense as we're going forward is that sentiment of diversity and inclusion is super important. And in every conversation that I've been having about building out the future of DoD for biotechnology, that is an important sentiment. So highly support that. We do have many initiatives that are ongoing that are in education and workforce development in particular, recognizing that we're rapidly expanding the bioeconomy, and that's going to require a much more diverse, skilled workforce in order to sustain it. And so we're very committed to developing the next generation of biotechnologists through some different K through 12 STEM education, but then also creating opportunities to engage more broadly with the Department of Defense across sectors and industry and academia. So I wanted to highlight an important milestone that we've reached in biotechnology for DoD, and that is in October, the announcement of our 9th Manufacturing Innovation Institute. This is called BioMade. This is the first one that's focused on bioindustrial manufacturing. And actually today is the official launch day of the Institute. So it is now open for business, which is super exciting. But why I want to bring this up in this particular question is because this is, it's going to be a kind of nationwide resource to bring different communities together within industry and academia that are interested in bioindustrial manufacturing to help drive research forward. And not only is it going to be a consortium of research institutes, but it's going to have a wealth of opportunity to educate and train the workforce in skills that are needed, or open up new opportunities to engage people that maybe have not been engaged in important work like the bioeconomy and the future of the nation before. And so it's a really exciting way to bring these communities together that haven't quite been engaged yet, and to help develop that workforce. So you can learn more. They have a website, biomade.org. I encourage everyone to go check it out, and it's a great way that we can leverage the broader community and really pull in that diversity and be very inclusive.
Thank you, Stephanie. Ken?
So can you hear me? Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So NHGRI has a lot of initiatives. We understand the importance of trying to diversify the need to diversify the genomic workforce. And so NH has several initiatives that they focus on to try to do that, to try to address that. We have notices out, or guide notices out, to try to increase the inclusion of data sets that from diverse backgrounds analysis. We have training programs that are tailored to, that are focused on trying to improve the diverse representation of genomic researchers. In the case of ANVIL, which is where I like to focus on for this, is the ANVIL has an outreach component, which really is dedicated to trying to address the disparity that exists as far as access to large genomic data sets. Institutions that do not have the capacity to, the resources to actually do these large scale genomic analysis. And so in the case of diversity, we work with underrepresented populations, institutions that such as HBCUs, to actually understand what their needs are and see and try to work with them to foster the use of ANVIL into their analysis. The ANVIL team also has done course curriculum for the Research Consortium of Minority Institutions to teach how to use resources like cloud-based platforms and understand what barriers that may be that groups are experiencing that prohibit their ability to use these platforms. And so those are just to name some of the things that the NHGRI has done to try to address, and we are continually evaluating and trying to find ways to improve our ability to increase the diversity of the genomic workforce. Like I said before, we have funding opportunities, which I mentioned before in my first talk to try to increase the diversity of workforces. We have outreach programs to at both the high school and all the way to the postdoc and senior investigator levels to try to diversify the genomic workforce. And it's actually part of our strategic plan to continue investing in ways to diversify the genomic workforce.
Thank you very much, Ken. Joy?
I can speak just to what In-Q-Tel is doing as an organization. So, you know, I think like any place we've been doing well on some fronts and not as well on others. You know, one thing I'll say before we launched any type of formal initiative, we had, as of a few years ago, and it's held today, half of our investment team are women. So I know that that's a lot better than kind of what you see in the commercial space, and that's something that we're really proud of. But in the past year or so, we've launched a formal diversity and inclusion initiative. It's still early days, but I know they're doing some things that I've already seen have an impact on the recruiting side, as one example. So we're now blinding resumes for new hires, in the sense that you know, the school name is blinded. You still see degree and of course other pieces of information that are important for evaluating a hire. But we found that because I think we favor certain schools, and those schools have certain, you know, demographic mixes, we'll say, we have ended up having that demographic mix kind of carry over into In-Q-Tel. Big surprise. So we're trying to make some changes to promote a more diverse and inclusive workforce.
Thank you very much, Joe. And so my last question for this formal part of our panel is, well, it's a free for all. What are your closing thoughts or suggestions to the audience? And Ken?
So, I mean, for me, it's really to continue advocating and pushing for ways to reduce barriers for access to these data sets. Really understanding, that that's a key component for us to really understand how and achieve the true potential of using genomics in both in addressing analysis, but also health disparities and also health overall for the broader population. And so I think that's really where you see a lot of us trying to understand is what's the best way to really make these data sets and this data useful to address the broad range of needs that these type of resources could be leveraged to try to address.
Thank you, Ken. Joy?
Yeah, so if you guys have been following the news developments on the Hill, you'll know there's been a lot of talk about infrastructure lately. I think the term is being defined more broadly these days. So I would pose this question to those joining the event, the researchers. What infrastructure would help you with your research? Or what infrastructure would help make a startup more viable for you? I'll give you an example. My boss, who Stephanie knows, is obsessed with how we can make GenBank better. I have a bioinformatics degree. I've been on GenBank a little bit. I have not used GenBank nearly as much as some folks that are out there using it for their research on a regular basis. So make your voice heard. I mean, we want to hear from the people that are actually doing the research too, in whatever way you think is best. If you have the opportunity to write an op-ed, blog about it, I'll only volunteer myself, but reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn. Would love to hear the thoughts that you have in the computational genomics space.
Thank you, Joe. Stephanie?
I would agree with everything that Ken and Joe just said. I think those are fantastic recommendations and closing thoughts. I will add to really push as much as you can to focus on interdisciplinary work. Don't get siloed in a particular area, but really try to branch out and touch other disciplines and work with people and people in expertise that you never thought of working with before, because that's really where some interesting innovation really happens. And I think that's a really powerful role that academia can play, because there's a lot of flexibility and freedom to really just explore completely unknown areas, and just really keep doing the hard work, because for DoD, in particular for modernization, we are so reliant on a robust and high quality kind of academic ecosystem that's really going to highlight and bring new capabilities to bear. We can't do our job if we don't have that really strong and resilient and innovative academic and industry ecosystem really doing that initial work. So keep doing the hard work, because we need you.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you again to all the panelists. Speaking for myself, I learned a lot, and I'm sure that the audience benefited from this discussion. We do have about 6 minutes, and so if you have any questions from the audience, please type them in the Q&A section. There is one question from Zishan, and why there is more focus on infrastructure development, high volume data generation than reproducible and robust new method development for genome data processing and analysis? Please comment on takeover few groups in heavily controlling the analysis worldwide. And due to that, most of the data analyzed today is kind of biased. So definitely an interesting question. Do we have a volunteer?
I'm happy to take a stab at that, but welcome others.
Yes.
So I would say kind of the reproducibility and trust in data or unbiased data is incredibly important. And I don't want to minimize that at all in what we're talking about in the infrastructure piece. There's a lot of unsolved questions that are the data itself. I think getting ultimately to an unbiased analysis is the ultimate goal. I think why you're hearing infrastructure development coming up so much is because that is regardless of how well we do in the data front, infrastructure is going to hold us back. So we have to solve the infrastructure piece of how do we bring these data sets together? How do we build the infrastructure to actually support data and computational genomics and biological data science at scale? Because when we're, at least from the Department of Defense perspective, and I'm sure other agencies would agree, what we need to do is take what you're doing in the academic and industry and bring it up to an at-scale capability that the whole government can utilize for the betterment of the nation. So, Ken or Joe, do you want to add anything?
I would just add that, yeah, I mean, from NHGRI's perspective, it's like Stephanie highlighted, similar. It's all of it. In the case of, it's important for us to understand how we can diversify genomic data sets that are being generated. It's important for us to understand how the information is being used in an equitable fashion. Reusing the data sets is important. That's why one of the things we highlighted was that is how do you reuse genomic data to generate new knowledge? How do you make it fair? How can we do that while also understanding the need to make sure that it's diversified enough to be equitable to the broad population?
Thank you, Stephanie and Ken, and thank you again to all three of our panelists. I really appreciate your willingness to participate and to engage with all those questions. Again, I'm convinced that it was very useful for a number of people. I would like to end by thanking again Kemi and Kim for organizing this. It was, from my perspective, was both useful and enjoyable. Thank you very much, and I guess we're returning 4 minutes to the organizers. So
thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Waisman, for moderating the session, and all the panelists for sharing various funding mechanisms to support research and possibilities of tech transfer and startups. It's exciting to hear where the computational genomics field is heading. Thank you again so much. In fact, we have 3 additional minutes to take a 15-minute break, so we will resume the conference at 5 o'clock. Thank you.